All right. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Mallory DeMay, and I am a faculty support and classroom consultant, and I will be the host for this session. The Eyes Have It, a three-stage process to fostering classroom collaboration. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, keep your eye on the chat for a link to a helpful session feedback survey. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to Deborah Carpenter, Assistant Professor, Faculty Lead at Ashford University.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for that introduction, and I welcome everyone. I honor your time and just very, very excited that you're here in what is an incredibly unique week. The Wednesday after election, the fact that you're here just means a lot to me. So thank you for your support, and welcome once again to The Eyes Have It, a three-stage process to foster classroom collaboration. Let's examine today's objectives for this session. I am going to share a rationale for this framework and just say to each of you that this is by no means the only framework for enhancing classroom collaboration. My three-stage process is one that I've developed with much passion, and I continue to use it to this day. I know that it has helped other associate faculty members, but again, it's just one way that you can enhance classroom collaboration. I'm going to model today's framework using classroom examples from my own courses, and I'll share additional tips and tricks along the way. As Mallory said, I do invite your questions and comments if you just want to post them in the chat so I can make sure that we bring those forward at the end of the presentation. So I want to share a little bit about my rationale for developing this framework. I have been with Ashford as a full-time faculty member nearly 8 years now. And right when I was hired in 2012, I was hired to join the faculty support and development team, which meant that I would be responsible for annual instructional quality reviews as well as mentoring. And then in the past 2 years, I was actually asked to oversee the FSD committee as the team lead. So you can imagine that I have had lots of experience talking with faculty members about enhancing their classroom practice. And one of the things that continues to come up is challenges with the discussion forums in and of themselves. Specifically, I talk to faculty who oversee medium to large sized classes, and they struggle with the requirement of having 6 substantive posts over the course of each discussion thread over 3 days of the learning week. And they struggle with this because they feel that they are somehow letting down their students if they do not reply to every student in every thread through every week of the course, which, you know, if you have had a medium size or a large size class, that can be very impractical time-wise and can lead to burnout, which is what we do not want. So 3 of the questions that continue to come up are, with a mid-sized to large class, how can I increase student engagement, critical thinking, and collaboration? How can I summarize themes and encourage peer-to-peer conversation? Not just me talking with my students, but how can I encourage students to talk with one another? And lastly, in a medium to large size class, how can I get all students thinking without necessarily having to respond to each one every week? So what I want to do now is call your attention to the picture on this slide. And I want to share with you that I come from the elementary education environment. I taught 3rd grade and 4th grade. And in my elementary classroom, I set up my students in table groups, and that was by design. I wanted to encourage them to collaborate with one another, to talk to one another, to share perspectives with one another on a given topic or a question that I might provide, because I knew that if they were sharing perspectives with each other, they were going to get a lot more out of the question or the topic that I provided. And while they would discuss in table groups, I would circulate, because as you know, if you hail from elementary school, you're rarely at your desk. You're circulating among these table groups to ensure that students are conversing, that you can interject as needed, and that it really fosters a much more robust conversation. So what I started to think about as faculty were coming to me with their questions is, why couldn't I just mirror that same kind of table group dynamic in my online classroom with adult learners? So I want you to look at this picture for a moment and imagine that this table represents a discussion thread. Now, let's just say I have students A, B, C, and D in this discussion. In the real world, we'd have E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. You know what I'm saying if you have a large class. But if these were students in a discussion thread, I could respond to student A, have a conversation with him, and pose a thoughtful question. I could then, in a separate discussion, in a separate reply to student B, offer him a question, respond to student C, offer her a question, and so on and so forth. But what would that do to foster collaboration with each other? What would that do to foster any peer-to-peer exchange of perspectives? It really wouldn't do anything, because I would be having a series of what I like to call tea party conversations or silo conversations with each student. What if instead I treated it as a table group and I presented one question for all of those students to come to? That way, they're not only responding to me, but they're also getting the chance to add value to the conversation by responding to one another. So that is what this three-stage process provides. It provides an opportunity for you to give real-world connections to your students that relate to course content. It decreases the opportunity for silo or tea party exchanges between only student and teacher. And this is the best part. It allows you as the instructor to invite more students to consider fewer questions in your class. Because again, a part of the challenge was, well, gosh, I have a class of 20 to 30 students. How do I come up with that many questions each week to stimulate critical thinking? The answer is you don't have to. So let's look at the three-stage process. Now, the three stages of the Eyes Have It framework are: stage 1, instill and initiate; stage 2, instruct and invite; and stage 3, interject and inspire. Now, you can probably figure out why I call this presentation The Eyes Have It. As I was developing this framework, kind of by coincidence, I realized that a lot of my action verbs all started with eyes. And I'm a professed pun nerd. And I just started thinking, well, the eyes have it. Gosh, that reminds me about, votes and how emotion carries when it comes to a vote. And when the eyes have it, the vote carries. And I thought, well, I can call it the eyes have it, because these are the eyes that are going to carry you, the instructor, into having a much more rich, engaging, and collaborative classroom environment. This is also why my teenage daughters think I'm lame, because I'm a pun nerd. So here we go. Stage 1, instill and initiate. If I'm going to create a classroom where students are excited to collaborate and engage, I must instill the expectation from the very first day of the class. And I do that through my week 1 announcement. It's one that immediately follows my welcome. My week 1 announcement is called, "Are You Striving to Be Distinguished?" This is a lengthy announcement that I'm happy to share with all of you. And in this announcement, there is a specific section which I call Calling All Thinkers. Its acronym is CAT, and that is by design, because there is a visual cue of a cat that I'm going to show you shortly. For students to earn distinguished participation in my classroom, they must go beyond the minimum. The minimum in the class is replying thoughtfully to 2 peers. They must go beyond that by choosing to engage in one of my Calling All Thinkers opportunities. And that means they're going to be engaging more robustly with one another, or perhaps in a small group. The idea is, if there are multiple opportunities for them, they have to choose one and go beyond the minimum to earn distinguished participation. Not only do I share the expectations, I expect that students will acknowledge them. And the way I do that is by opening the announcement, and that's an easy thing to do. When you're in the edit window, you simply select the option at the bottom that allows students to reply to your announcement. And in that way, I know that they've acknowledged that they're ready to be successful. You can do that in a fun way. You can even put just a fun get to know you question to show that they've read to the bottom of your announcement. But the important thing is that you instill the expectation and that you expect them to acknowledge it. Now, the second part of this first stage is initiate. I want to initiate opportunities every week for my whole class to come together and collaborate on a given topic. I do that in 2 ways. The first way is when something that I call the weekly inspiration, typically posted on Fridays. And this is made up of an announcement on the course homepage and then a corresponding discussion thread in that week's discussion thread 1. The second way I initiate whole class collaboration is with something I call my 2 cents. My 2 cents is like a mini lecture. It's my commentary, a professional experience that again pertains to a weekly course concept. That is also posted in the discussion thread, and that gives students another opportunity to engage. Now, something that I didn't comment on, but it's a visual clue to me right now, is that when you see the words calling all thinkers, you'll notice that that is written in all red capital letters. That in and of itself is a visual cue to my students. Anytime they see something that's in all red caps, they know that that is one of their opportunities to reach distinction, to engage with the class. So let's look at some examples of that. I want to first start by showing you just a section of that Are You Striving for Distinction announcement. Again, this is what I post in week 1. It's a long announcement. I'm happy to share it, but I just wanted to show you the end of it. The end of it specifically details what Calling All Thinkers conversations are all about, why they're designed to help everybody engage, how you know if you've stumbled upon one, that you're going to see the scholarly cat lost in thought, ready to engage. This is a cue that I use all the time. And here again is where I instill those expectations. So now I want to show you the first way that I initiate whole class collaboration. The first way is in my Friday weekly inspiration. So this is an announcement I post every Friday. It will always contain a clip, a website, an article. It will be another resource for students to consider that ties into the weekly course concept. So I initiate it with the weekly inspiration. I'll always set up whatever the resource is. I want to kind of get students ready in the mindset for what they should be thinking about when they view the clip so that they are ready to engage. And then at the bottom, I remind them that this is not where they're to respond. In fact, I don't even open this announcement, but I tell them that they need to go to the corresponding thread in order to engage. Now, some of you might think, well, why don't you just open the announcement and let them engage right there? You absolutely could do that. That would be a wonderful strategy. And you could then go back to this announcement and just check the engagement there. The reason that I've chosen to attach it to a discussion itself is because I tie this into distinguished grading. I tie this into distinguished participation. So when I'm going into Speed Grader to grade discussions, I want to see that that extra stretch that students have indicated shows up there where I'm grading so I don't forget. But you could easily do it this way as well. So I told you that there's 2 parts to the weekly inspiration. The first is the announcement that you post on the course homepage. And the second is the opportunity you give students to reflect on this particular resource. So notice the visual cue at the top. All class respond, thoughts on the week 3 inspiration. I have one of these for every week of the course. So there they have the visual cue. Then they have the instruction. Don't forget, they're supposed to do something in the announcement, view a resource, read an article. And then they are also encouraged, this probably isn't the best example because I don't see it in my verbiage, but typically I will say to them, read everything before you respond. View your peers' responses, because the idea in an authentic conversation is that you're adding value, you're adding new insight. If everyone simply just responded to the question in a similar fashion, that really wouldn't mirror an authentic conversation. But if you've already read what's been said, you can reply. A student could reply to a peer. They wouldn't even have to reply to me, and they would still earn distinguished credit. So I do ask that they read and review everything before responding. So this is the second way that I initiate whole class collaboration, and this is with what I like to call my 2 cents. Again, you see the visual cue at the top, just showing them that this is just another opportunity that they can engage. I'll always put a visual, like always 2 pennies, and this is my chance to provide some intellectual elaboration. I will typically share a professional experience in great detail, a story from the field, I like to call it too, and that just really allows students to connect a little more deeply with more real world context to whatever it is we've been discussing in the course for that week. So I initiate the collaboration, and then there at the bottom where you can't see, it'll say, what are your thoughts? What are your reflections? Any personal examples? Here's the fun thing about calling all thinkers and all of these opportunities. They require no additional research. Students do not have to go and seek out research to support their views. Really, this is all about reflecting, connecting, applying, and doing it in a way where they're also sharing perspectives with one another. So just to recap, stage 1 is instill and initiate. Instill the expectation, initiate the opportunities for whole class collaboration. That brings us to stage 2. There are not only opportunities to engage whole class, you can capture a moment where you are instructing one student and use that as a springboard to invite many students to the table. Remember that table metaphor. We want to invite students to the table as often as we can, rather than just having those silo conversations. So think about instructing in your discussion forum. As you're going through your discussion thread, you're thinking about who you want to respond to as you begin those initial responses. So you might decide to use student-specific words as jumping off points. I do that all the time. In fact, I like to actually highlight a passage or a line or two that really jumped out at me, that made me realize, ooh, I have something to connect there. I have an opportunity to instruct the class. And this is where I come to a very important point. When you are commenting on what a student has said, you don't ever want to jump straight to a question about what you want them to do next. You need to provide your bridge, and this is what makes you special. This is what makes the course special, that you're the instructor of. The bridge is your professional expertise, your personal experience, scholarly research, or a resource, other instructive insight. You need to provide that bridge to get the student from what they've said and why it's meaningful, your instruction, and then what you want them to do next. And this is where the magic happens. When you are ready to pose a question to that one student, why not pose the question to all the students? Because when you do that, when you pose a thought-provoking question or you provide a resource or scenario for further analysis, if you widen the net and open it up to the whole class, then all students are going to learn from your instructor bridge, not just the student that you responded to. So let's look at what that might look like. So here in my discussion thread, Cindy, my student, has said something really interesting that I want to use as a jumping off point. But notice what I do at the top. I don't want any of my other students to miss this opportunity to engage and to respond to an eventual question. So I put the visual cue at the top. Cindy and class, what do you look for in a mentor? I want any student that happens to be scrolling through this thread to know, oh, I'm going to have an opportunity to reach distinction here. I'm going to have an opportunity to engage with Cindy and my instructor and other members of the class. So if you notice the way that I have structured my response, I highlight something that Cindy has said. I connect it to a professional experience that I've had, to something that I want to share, something that brings meaning to why surrounding yourself with the right people, with the right mentors is so important in your own professional development. So that's my instruction. And then I've divided this one in two so I can show you the bottom. At the bottom, I finish my bridge, but then I invite all students to engage. So there I say, calling all thinkers, there's my scholarly cat, there's my visual cue. What 3 qualities do you feel are most important in a mentor and why? And I remind students in this verbiage, feel free to respond directly to me or to a peer in this conversation. Peer-to-peer response is every bit as valuable and insightful to the robustness of our conversation as it would be if they responded to me. So that's stage 2, but let's back it up again. Stage 1 is to instill expectations and initiate whole class collaboration. Stage 2 is to instruct individual students in the discussion forum, but also invite all students to engage in that conversation. And that brings me to stage 3, which is interject and inspire. So as you're going through your discussion questions where the dynamic is so engaged because you've provided these different opportunities for students to come to the table and to get excited about topics, you then, as the instructor, can go in and interject. You can respond to groups of students at a time, not individually, because in doing so, you have the opportunity to synthesize important ideas. You might see trends or commonalities, things that all the students' responses have in common. It allows you to jump in, add insight, provide closure to the topic, and very importantly, you want to inspire them. You want to use your creative elements to inspire them to keep engaging. When students see that you are circling back to inspire them and that they've touched you with something that they've said, that makes them want to engage even more. And that's when your dynamic really becomes exciting in the classroom. So let's look at that. This is a post where this is further down in my thread. This might be towards a Sunday or a Monday. And these three students in particular, Justin, Ashley, and Jennifer, were engaged in a really good conversation about what it means to be a mama bird in the classroom and how that nurturing is so important. And they all attacked it in a different way, but they did it respectfully. They disagreed, but yet they came together. And so I wanted to just respond to all three of them at once, just to let them know how much I appreciated their respectful discourse. I wanted to insert some insight of my own and wanted to just help bring that conversation to closure. And you can do that, especially when you have large classes, by reading what's been written and finding those themes and trends and commonalities. That way you don't, when you respond, other students realize they're actually part of something. They're part of a table. They're part of a community. They're part of a cohort that's been discussing something that then you just happen to walk by and jump in and interject. Again, that table metaphor. So let's talk about inspiring, because we really want our students to continue to engage and be excited to jump in and take part and share. Nothing says spontaneous and authentic reaction like a baby face, right? I use baby faces all the time to signify my excitement and my thrill and pleasure with reading student responses. So I'll use this a lot. With Charlene, she just really wowed me with her reply. Notice that I connect it. I provide a bridge. Even in those we call them second tier replies. Even in those replies, I will provide a bridge. There always should be a connection. Your expertise should be evident in every one of your posts. So once that connection has been established, notice that I want to push Charlene a little further. So at the bottom, there's an additional question there for her. Two things I want you to notice about the question. One is that it's posted in bold, and the other is that there is the expectation of a reply. Phrases like, I look forward to your elaboration. I'll be checking it back in. I can't wait to know what you think. I'm excited to check back in with you. All of those kinds of statements build accountability in our students. They create a little bit of urgency. They light that fire like, oh, my instructor's actually coming back in to see what I have to say. And so that also helps to stimulate engagement in the class. Another way that I like to inspire effort is with video. Lexi in particular, she made herself very vulnerable. She shared something with the class that I really wanted to just let her know that immediately touched me, and I wanted to embrace her courage and validate her. And so I wrote a response, but I also just popped in there. I'm about to go to bed in that picture, by the way, like just grubby sweatshirt, not done. And that's okay. I think we want to show our students that we're real people, we're adults, and we're juggling multiple responsibilities too. And it's okay that we don't always have to be polished looking. And what that does is it really kind of creates that safe emotional space for students to do the same. So I wanted to show you an example of that. So that brings us to some final tips. Again, you've got your 3 stages. You instill expectations, you initiate whole class collaboration, you instruct students one at a time, but you also invite other students to join the conversation, to come to the table. Then, as you're reading through your discussion replies, you can interject, and you won't forget to inspire. Some final just household kinds of tips are, Make sure you gain attention of your students at the top of the post, not the middle, not the bottom. I've seen oftentimes faculty will write, class, what do you think? At the very bottom of a response to just one student. Half the time other students aren't going to see that was an opportunity for them too. So gain the attention at the top. I like to use all red capitals. Some faculty feel that that is shouting. I feel that it is enthusiastic cheering. So it's all about your perspective, but find a visual cue that works for you. I like to use a spreadsheet to track responses to students because, as you know, through the end of a given course, you should be replying to at least one response to each student throughout the entire course. A spreadsheet helps me to track that. It's old school. I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm happy to share. I like to change the color of my greeting when I reply to students just to set my response off from that of the rest of the peers. So I do use red as a visual cue. And then when you consider all of these options that I've shared with you today, whether it's the weekly inspiration with a corresponding thread, whether it's the My 2 cents, or whether it's the calling all thinkers, whether you're just bringing them to the table after you've engaged with a student, if you offer multiple options, let them choose one. I never would expect that students are engaged in all of these. It would, first of all, burn them out. And secondly, I think choice is empowering. Not every one of my opportunities is going to be equally attractive to all my students. So this allows them to choose what they're most interested in to respond. And remember, no additional research is required of them, just their perspective, their insight, their personal examples. When you do pose a question, whether it's to the whole class or to just one individual student at a time, always expect a reply. Be creative in inspiring them to continue to engage, to help add their value to this learning community. Circle back to your threads over all 3 days or more. We know that these are just minimums, but if we're talking minimums, make sure that you're in your discussion threads over 3 days. And then last but not least, you are all experts in your own classes if you have your own classes, and that's what makes your courses unique and special. It's okay to recycle your same awesome stories from course to course because you know that that story is going to probably come up because you are discussing the same topics. However, you always want to make sure that you refresh your story so that it is personally significant to the person that you are responding to. If you don't make that connection with the bridge, then it feels more like an info dump. It feels like it's not an authentic response to that student. So always refresh your stories to make sure that they fit, to make sure that they are meaningful there. And so that leads me to questions. I'd love to, know what you think. I'd love to know what's on your mind, any best practice that you're engaged in. I'm going to open my chat right now. If you need anything, if you would like to see examples of what I do, just reach out to me via email. And remember those eyes. The eyes have it. And when you have those eyes in your classroom, you are absolutely going to see a difference in fostering collaboration in your discussion forums. So with that, I'm going to open up the chat.
Yeah, and Debbie, there was a question from Jen Robinson. She was just wondering, when you're doing those posts, is that part of your minimum 6 posts that are required of faculty, or are these in addition to?
That is an excellent question, Jen. So if you're following the online faculty course requirements, when a faculty member posts something that is standalone, that is not in response to another student, that post in and of itself does not count toward the 6. However, it's a wonderful thing to do because those posts, like the weekly inspiration, the My 2 cents, stimulate thinking, and they stimulate thinking around the topic that students are already talking about through their course materials and through their other through their discussion prompts. So even though that first one does not count, the ones that you post in response to those students do count. So once you engage them and they start sharing, and then you come back in with your validation and continued expertise, then those do count towards your 6. And in the example I gave for Cindy, where you respond to Cindy, but then you you pose a question to the whole class, that would absolutely count because you're responding to Cindy, you're sharing your instructor expertise through the bridge. And then when you pose the question, it's not on Cindy only. Other students get to benefit from your story you tell and from the questions that you ask. So it's like each question gets more bang for its buck, if that makes sense.